Mr. Wright, who killed Dr. Teresa Sievers?
I did, and Jimmy Rogers.
Mr. Sievers said he had $100,000 from insurance to pay someone to kill his wife.
Yes.
Why did you decide to get a prepaid phone on May 17th?
Because I had talked to Jimmy and got a commitment that he was going to help.
Okay, so now you know that that you've got to be in, by this point now you know you have to be in Florida that weekend, at some point that weekend, that the Sievers family is out of town. Right?
Yes.
Did you have a plan for how you were going to get here?
Well, driving down, because you can't fly without using your license and leaving a big trail, but so we were going to drive down.
All right, so in this moment now, when you pick up that hammer on that chest, you're following Dr. Sievers into her home?
Yes.
You're behind her?
Yes.
Does she see you?
No. I've never hit anybody with a hammer before.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is a bi-weekly podcast covering true crime,
Unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
urban legends, and the dark side of the Sunshine State. So first, if you would like to support the show, please subscribe at patreon.com/Paradise After Dark podcast.
On Patreon, you'll have access to weekly bonus episodes, our monthly spin-off show, Vacation Edition, discounts on our merchandise, and more.
Yeah, people have been ordering and saving quite a bit of money from Patreon. So
yeah, ordering our swag.
Yeah, it's cheaper to subscribe to Patreon and then order your stuff.
Yeah.
In some cases. So
Yep.
You can also check out our website, ParadiseAfterDark.com, for our latest episodes, links to social media, our Etsy store, and there's a special little donate button if you just want to take one time to help out the show.
If you have a question, a Florida case suggestion, or you'd like to chat, please email us at paradiseafterdarkpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, Lauren she got suggested one and has been diligently working on that particular case.
Yep.
Looking to do maybe help some people out, actually. It's going to be really good. So, speaking of which, Lauren, what are we, I think we're still working on a project here.
Yes, we are headed into part 3 of the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers.
Yeah, this is a kind of a bone-chilling case. Every time I think about it.
This is part 3. If you haven't listened to part 1 or 2, please go back and listen to those first and then come back for part 3.
Just don't listen to part 2 first.
If you want to binge all 4, head over to Patreon. They're already available on Patreon. You don't have to wait. So, let's recap real quick. Dr. Teresa Sievers, a well-known and loved holistic doctor, was murdered in her home in Bonita Springs, Florida on June 28, 2015. It quickly came to light that Dr. Sievers' husband, Mark, had orchestrated her murder. He hired his friend, Curtis Wainwright, and Jimmy Rogers to drive down from Missouri to kill Teresa. All 3 men were eventually arrested for the murder. Now, Curtis Wainwright pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the stipulation that he would testify against Jimmy Rogers and Mark Sievers. Jimmy Rogers pled not guilty to first-degree murder, and Mark Sievers was charged and pled not guilty to first-degree murder. Now, let's rewind for a second and discuss the tip that came in that started this whole thing in motion.
Let's do it.
According to an article in the Fort Myers News Press, 11 days after the homicide, on the evening of July 9th, a law enforcement official in Illinois contacted the Lee County Sheriff's detectives. Chief Jeff Hamilton with the Southern Illinois Airport Authority told detectives that an acquaintance of his had overheard information about Curtis Wainwright being in Florida at the time of the murder and felt he might be involved somehow. In an interview at the Jefferson County Jail in Mount Vernon, Illinois, the witness said that she was at home in Baldwin, Missouri on Saturday, June 27th, and heard a visibly upset Angela Wright, wife of Curtis Wainwright, complain that her husband had left on an unplanned and short-notice trip to Florida to repair a computer at the home of Mark Sievers.
Now, was he a tech guy for them at the office?
He was a computer guy, and he did actually do some work for the Sievers at their medical practice.
Okay.
So it was not out of the realm of possibility that he would go, well, I mean, going all the way to Florida from Missouri to fix a computer but
I think they can usually do most of that stuff remote.
Unless it was a hardware issue, but I don't know why that you would have someone come from Missouri when you could find someone locally.
You call it Geek Squad.
So Curtis Wright told his wife that she could not accompany him on this trip. Apparently she was pissed.
I can understand that.
Furthermore, the witness said that Angela Wright complained that Curtis left his cell phone at home and could not understand how he could do that because they were newlyweds, married just 2 months at this time, and she said her husband lives on his phone. The witness kept contact through Angela Wright's mother, Kathy Moran, and was able to learn that Wright returned home on the evening of Monday, June 29th. The witness said Kathy Moran told her that the Wrights received notice of Teresa's death on Tuesday, June 30th, then left for Florida. Moran expressed concerns that Curtis Wright was involved in the doctor's death because the couple is destitute and had no money for back-to-back trips to Florida.
Now, more damning information came from a woman named Carrie Kane. Carrie Kane, a longtime friend of Mark Sievers and Curtis Wright, attended Teresa's funeral. Now, according to documents released from authorities, she became suspicious of Mark almost immediately. She found it odd that Mark Sievers spent much of the day before his wife's funeral at the beach, and after the funeral, he invited people to his home to go swimming. He's forgetting he's in mourning, Kane said. He wants to go back to the house and celebrate. This is the very same house that Teresa was murdered in. He told her chilling details of the killing and didn't seem particularly interested in catching the person who bludgeoned his wife to death. He told her his wife had been bludgeoned 17 times in the head with a hammer. He actually showed her the pantry where he said the killers were lying in wait, and he told her his wife was attacked from behind. Now, the mutual friend, Curtis Wainwright, also acted strangely at one point, running out of the funeral mass not to return. During the funeral, Wright, who was a tech background, fixed a malfunctioning slide projector showing photos of Teresa Sievers, but he later refused to help fix a projector showing videos of Teresa. Now, when I look back on it, I think he didn't even want to see her alive, Kane said. Mark is the one that stood out to me, Kane told investigators. Mark did not act natural in his behavior with anything, other than laughing that was natural, that wasn't put on. But his cry was not his cry, it was fake. Kane initially reached out to detectives anonymously through Crime Stoppers. 3 days after Kane's interview, sheriff's deputies in Missouri stormed Wright's home and arrested him on a second-degree murder charge. Now, she had called a couple different times. Mm-hmm. She called several times to Crime Stoppers and said, hey, this is what's going on here.
And didn't she wear a wire and talk to Mark Sievers on the phone?
She actually did an interview where she talks about putting on a wire and going and talking. She said she was nervous as hell because obviously you're sitting there talking to someone who you're pretty well convinced murdered his own wife. And so you're a lifelong friend, not a wife. So yeah, you'd be nervous. She put on a wire. She went and talked to him, and detectives sat there just waiting. I mean, I guess they came in and talked to her and said, hey, could you help us with this? We understand what it is, but we kind of want you to help us. So she did. And I guess she talked to him for, I think they said 7 months. She constantly was in phone contact with him on a burner phone that the police supplied her.
Well, that would make sense because the crime happened in June of 2015, but he wasn't arrested until February of 2016.
Yeah, and the thing was, when she did that interview, she was talking about talking to him, and I guess a lot of times it was just like dumb conversation. And a couple times I think she felt like he was leaning towards more like she liked him or she wanted to be with him, even though she was married. And her husband had to tolerate this every single night she was on the phone with this man. It's like every night he would call for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes an hour on the telephone every single night.
How would you tolerate that?
I'm not sure I could, but I think I understand where he's coming from, because he's like, if this is what's happened, if they can catch the killer, but it's one of those, all this stuff stacked, it was all incriminating. She was taking notes, but I guess at a couple different times, she felt like he knew that she was working with police, because there's one time in particular she talks about where she gets like a text message from him on the phone, and it says, "Hey, there's a present for you on your front door. It was just delivered." And she opens the door, and he's standing in her yard.
What?
Yeah. So he had gone to visit her, but he was texting her other phone, not the burner phone. So it was the interview. I forget. I think I can't
Wasn't
think
it
of
on Web Sleuth?
Web Sleuth's podcast. She does the interview, and I think you can actually see it if you go to Web Sleuth. I think there's a transcripts on it somewhere there. But the interview was very.
Ew, that is scary that he showed up at her house.
Yeah, so she said there was several times, and she felt like when she was talking and describing this, where they were standing in the house, and he was saying, "Hey, this is what my wife," so she was literally, and she said the worst part about it was knowing now, then she never thought that he was part of the murder. So he's like, "Yeah, this is what happened. This is what happened." So she's like, "Well, that's it. Maybe it was this, or maybe they did this." So she was trying in herself, like a lot of us do. We take to the internet and pictures, and we start judging things. Hey, what about this? What about that? So she was literally like, "Well, maybe the guy broke in and did this." So she was kind of on his side originally, until she realized, wait a minute, you're not acting right. You're not behaving right. Things are wrong. And then that's when she really started calling Crime Stoppers. Because there was one case where she felt uncomfortable because it was almost like she was pushed into the kitchen up against the pantry. And he's like, well, this is where this all happened. This is what they did. And she said and he was talking about Curtis Wright. And she thought that maybe he was in the house that day. And then she got nervous. So she was like, okay, well, I've got to go. And then she left, scared to death.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, check that out somewhere. Her name is
Carrie Kane, and it's on Web Sleuth.
Web Sleuth, yeah.
So let's take a quick look at Mark's cell phone records. There was more than just evidence of Mark's numerous affairs found on his cell phone, which we talked about, I believe, in part 1. On April 29th, Sievers sent Wright a text that said, "Hopefully we can talk privately tomorrow. Nothing about you and Angie, but it's personal." Now, this was the day before Sievers flew to Missouri to attend Wright's wedding to his wife, Angie. So Wright would later testify that the personal topic that Mark wanted to discuss with him was the plan of murdering his wife, Teresa. Now, this is back in April. The murder was in June. So this is where it starts. A series of texts between the two friends from May 3rd to May 17th referred to mail, gifts, envelopes, cards, a condo Mark Sievers has in Missouri, whether Wright's mail was secure at his home, and references to other and, quote, check other. So the texting between the two stopped at 11:03 p.m. on June 25th, 2015, and resumed at 2:17 p.m. on June 27th, when Sievers texted Wright, "No need to call me. Hope you're having a nice day." They didn't text again until June 30th, when Wright texted Sievers saying he heard about the murder and that he and Angela were en route to Florida.
Well, tell us about the GPS, because that plays a crucial role.
So Jerry Lubinsky, a friend of Curtis Wainwright, told detectives that he had loaned Curtis Wright a camera and a Garmin GPS unit, which had not been returned. Curtis Wright told him he was about to take a trip to work on a friend's computer in Fort Myers, Florida. Lubinsky identified Mark and Teresa Sievers as the friends that Curtis Wright was going to help with the computer. Now, this was the GPS unit found in the rental car that Wright had rented. The information gathered from the GPS was found in the deleted information area stored within the unit. That Garmin GPS outlines Wright's trip from Missouri to Florida and back between June 27th and June 29th, with searches made for Sievers' Jarvis Road home in the Walmart in nearby Fort Myers, Florida. The video surveillance from the Walmart showed that Wright and Rogers walked into the store. There they purchased a 4-piece lockpick set, men's water shoes, wet wipes, a package of 20-gallon garbage bags, backpack, black bath towels, t-shirts, and men's shoes. The men are seen on video surveillance walking out of the store, and a white Hyundai matching Wright's rental car is seen leaving the parking lot. The GPS shows 2 more local searches before the time of the homicide, and then nothing more until 12:44 a.m., Monday, June 29th, when the vehicle is headed back to Missouri. Now, the GPS records show return trip stops in Bushnell, Florida, where Wright is caught on camera at a gas station, appearing to remove a front license plate from the white Hyundai. Rogers paid for gas with a $100 bill, and the 2 men left the station. The final GPS information was recorded near Wright's Hillsboro, Missouri home.
Okay, so here we are. Now, Jimmy Rogers, Curtis Wayne Wright, Mark Sievers are all in jail awaiting trial. And Wright and Rogers have been extradited from Missouri back to Lee County.
Right.
Florida. Okay, now we must remember that Curtis Wayne Wright already pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, so he's done. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I do know, and we've talked about it before, and the same thing with the Mike Williams case, is if he's going to testify, he has to give them something that will help the prosecution, and also they must be 100% truthful.
Right.
And yeah, so it's a BFD. Now, part of his plea agreement was that he would testify against his co-defendants and basically spill the beans. Jury selection for Jimmy Rogers' trial started on Thursday, October 1st, 2019, and his trial began October 10th. The prosecution started the trial explaining the evidence they had against Jimmy connecting him and Curtis Wright to the murder. This case was about the perfect marriage, the perfect friendship, the perfect alibi, the perfect murder, said Hunter Hammond of the state's attorney office. It was almost perfect. Now, the state said Jimmy attacked Teresa with a hammer alongside Wayne at the request of her husband, Mark. Other connections in the case include testimony from his girlfriend at the time, who said they tossed blue overalls covered in blood and a cell phone on the side of the road in Missouri. And the defense stated that Jimmy did, in fact, come to Florida that weekend, but he was just visiting the beach and had nothing to do with the murder of Teresa Sievers. Yeah, okay.
So we can't go into every detail of this trial because it would require a zillion episodes, but let's just highlight the big parts.
Why don't we just do this, just keep doing parts till the end of the year?
Now, this is something I find very interesting because I know that we've talked extensively in our off-topic episodes on Patreon about technology and how it's used to solve crime. And this plays in here. Lee County Sheriff's Office analyst Myra Simmons was called to the stand, and she does investigative research for the detectives and things like analyzing call records. She requested a tower dump for the Jarvis Road area where the Sievers home is, and for one near Wright's home on Chapel Hill Court in Missouri. Simmons explained that she was looking for certain area codes, of which she then used a program to analyze and map call details. She eventually found a number with a Georgia area code, 404, connected to a burner phone that pinged close to Wright's home as well as Jarvis Road. Later, Simmons said that she analyzed data from Wright's personal cell phone. I noticed that the personal phone of Mr. Wright and the 404 burner phone pinged off the tower at almost the same time, she said. Another number she found with a California area code, 858, was found to have incoming and outgoing messages to the 404 phone. Are you following?
Yes, I'm getting it.
The first time the California number pinged off a tower was in Southwest Florida, in Naples, actually, off of Mockley Road near Walmart.
Which, if for those not familiar, Mockley Road and Bonita Beach Road, by the way the crow flies, is really not that far.
No, it's very close.
And keep in mind here, this is not 15-year-old technology. This is 2019, 2017, 2018 technology. So it's a lot more evolved than you go back to the earlier cases that you hear.
So Simmons also analyzed Mark Sievers' personal cell phone and compared those records to those from the 858 number. I observed that Mr. Sievers' personal cell and the prepaid burner phones both laid their heads on the same tower within minutes of each other, said Simmons. She said Sievers' personal phone pinged at the Walmart just a few minutes before the 858 burner phone. Simmons also analyzed Rogers' personal cell phone records, creating a few charts where the phone pinged on June 28th. The reports show that the cell phone pings follow the trip from Missouri to Southwest Florida. Then it ended at the Jarvis Road address of Dr. Teresa Sievers.
So this is solid evidence. I mean, this is pretty
Well,
damn
basically,
close.
they're putting together that 2 burner phones were purchased, one by Curtis Wainwright and one by Mark Sievers.
Yes.
And they've basically put the 404 phone in Curtis Wainwright's hand and the 858 burner phone in Mark Sievers' hand.
Yes.
And they also know that both burner phones were calling and texting each other.
Yeah, and they can back this all up with real raw data.
Yes. So the next witness called to the stand was Winston Chambers, TracFone wireless manager for the Subpoena Compliance Department. TracFone is basically burner phones.
Yeah, Walmart phone kind of thing, I think.
Now, TracFone Wireless has records of where the 858 burner phone was purchased, and Chambers says it was purchased at a Walmart on Juliet Boulevard in Naples, Florida. Finally, Curtis Wainwright testified in this case, and we have a few clips from that testimony we'd like to play for you.
Yeah, they're all 3 douchebags.
And this is the same as with the Mike Williams case. There's really no way to portray this without actually playing it for you. His whole testimony was like 3 hours, so I just...
So go ahead and get something to drink, get your feet put back, because we're going to play the whole thing.
We're not going to play the whole thing.
We're not?
No.
Okay.
I cherry-picked, I think, the most important parts of it and put it together. So let's go ahead and play that.
Mr. Wright, who killed Dr. Teresa Sievers?
I did, and Jimmy Rogers.
Mr. Sievers said he had $100,000 from insurance to pay someone to kill his wife.
Yes.
And you mentioned then that at some point you had a discussion with Mr. Rogers about this?
Yeah, when I first talked to Jimmy, I didn't tell him specifics about what it was. Just told him that I had an opportunity if he was still looking for a way to make money. Told him that it was something serious, and that it involved another person. But I didn't tell him any specifics about what it was yet.
All right, so you didn't tell Mr. Rogers that this involved Mark Sievers, who he had met at your wedding festivities?
No.
All right. At some point, did you ask Mr. Rogers to move forward with a plan to kill Dr. Sievers?
Yes.
When did you ask him to do this?
Well,
We'll get to that.
It's not a simple answer.
We'll get to it.
Okay.
When did you ask him to do it?
After Mark and I had started making the plans, I shared them with Jimmy, and
When?
I talked to him about what it was specifically before the planning, I guess, before I started sharing plans.
Okay. Was it still May of 2015 when you asked Mr. Rogers to help you go forward with this plan, or were we now into June of 2015?
The first conversation I had with him was on May 17th.
And why is May 17th? Why does May 17th stand out to you?
Because I had not committed to Mark whether I was going to help him or not. I'm sorry, Mr. Sievers, about whether or not I was going to help him until after I talked to Jimmy. And then I still had not gotten my other phone, or the prepaid phone that Mark had talked about us getting to communicate. I still hadn't gotten that because I hadn't committed yet.
So let me stop you. And so between May 2nd at your wedding, when Mr. Sievers came up with this plan of using the prepaid phones, and now May 17th, you still hadn't gotten your prepaid phone?
Right.
But during that same time interval, Mr. Sievers had gotten his phone and sent you the number for it.
Yeah, he got his, I think, the day after he got home. He went and got his. He had let me know that he had gotten it already, and that he mailed me the phone number. I think it was actually a wedding card that had the phone number on a piece of paper in it.
Now, you at the time, did you have your own cell phone?
Yes.
What was the phone number, if you can recall?
996-9581.
And what was the area code?
I'm sorry, 314.
And so you had your own phone and your own way of communicating with Mr. Sievers,
Yes.
but you wanted to keep your communications off book.
Yeah, that's what he said. He didn't want any communication about this done on our regular phones.
And on May 17th of 2015, did you then make a decision to get your own burner phone?
Yes.
Your prepaid phone? Why did you decide to get a prepaid phone on May 17th?
Because I had talked to Jimmy and got a commitment that he was going to help.
Okay, so now you know that that you've got to be by this point now you know you have to be in Florida that weekend, at some point that weekend, that the Sievers family is out of town, right?
Yes.
Did you have a plan for how you were going to get here?
Well, driving down, because you can't fly without using your license and leaving a big trail. But so we were going to drive down. You're looking for more information?
No. So
okay.
You were going to. The plan was to drive down to Florida to do it.
Yes.
And did you pass that information on to Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Did Mr. Rogers appear to you? You said you spoke to him in person. Did he appear to you to understand that you were asking him to come down here to kill a human being?
Objection for the question.
Did he appear to understand?
Sustained.
Did you engage Mr. Rogers in a conversation where you indicated to him that he was going to come down here to kill a human being?
Yes.
Did he respond to you when you told him this?
Yes.
Did he appear to understand what you were telling him?
Yes.
You know how you paid for the rent-a-car? Did you tell him?
Yes.
And you told him that you got money from the person who wanted you to kill Dr. Sievers?
Yes.
Did you ever tell Mr. Rogers that it was, in fact, Mark Sievers?
At some point, he figured it out on his own. But we did have a discussion about it once that happened.
Did you spend any of the remaining $500 on Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, it was spent on both of us. I mean, one of the things we did besides the food and all of that paid for both of us, all of our expenses. We also.
Let me ask you a question first. Did he know that the money? Did you tell him that the money that you were using to pay for his expenses on that trip came from the money given to you to come down here and kill Dr. Sievers?
Yes.
How long did it take for you and Mr. Rogers did Mr. Rogers actually join you on the trip to Florida?
Yes.
How long did it take for the two of you to come down here? Or to drive down here?
It was like 20 hours.
Did you stop anywhere and spend the night?
No.
Drove straight down?
Yes.
Did Mr. Rogers bring anything with him for the trip?
When I picked him up, he had a backpack and a cooler with him.
Did you know what was in the backpack and the cooler when you picked him up?
Not at the time.
Did you later learn what was in the backpack and the cooler?
Yes.
What was in them?
The cooler had duct tape, some industrial latex gloves.
Did you use any kind of any device or maps so that you could find your way down here, driving down here?
Yes.
What did you use?
A Garmin GPS.
Where did you get that Garmin GPS?
I got it from a friend of mine, Jerry Levinsky.
All right, so Jerry Levinsky let you have his Garmin,
Yes.
and that's what you use to navigate down here.
Yes.
Did you use it on both trips?
Yes.
When you arrived here in Lee County, where did you go?
The first place that we got off at the Bonita Springs exit. I'm not sure the roads and things down here, but it turned out it was the road that their house is right off of. So they live. So when we got off onto that road, which was the one that would have went to Bonita Beach, the house was right there. So I pointed it out, and then we decided to stop and check the house out. In the planning stages of this, Mark had given me information about the house and just wanted to make sure, verify that.
And when you say we, does that mean you and Jimmy Rogers?
Yes.
And what information had Mr. Sievers given you about the house?
He had given me the alarm code, the garage door opener, code, information about doors being unlocked. So he had told me that he was going to leave all the doors unlocked. He told me he was going to leave the alarm off. It was having intermittent problems, so sometimes it wasn't arming, but he said he was leave it off. He recommended that we go over the privacy fence. They have a large, high vinyl privacy fence around their yard. So his recommendation was to go over the fence and then come through the side entrance to the garage to gain access to the house.
Did you do that?
No.
Yeah, how did you get access to the house?
I just used the door opener code that he gave me.
Where did you park your rental-car?
1 block over, there's a small apartment complex. Parked there and just walked over.
And did you find any exterior doors unlocked?
Yes, everything was exactly the way he told me it would be, except the alarm actually was on.
And were you able to use that code? Were you able to... Your Honor, may we approach?
Okay.
And what did you do once you got back inside the Sievers home?
I looked around a little bit again, just to make sure nothing had changed. Most of the time we hung out in the garage, but the first thing we did when we got there was we went out the side door into the garage door. The garage has the front doors where the cars come in, and then on the right there's a man door that goes out into the yard, which was left unlocked for us to get into that way. There's also a door that goes between the garage and the house, so just so you know which doors there are. The first thing we did was we went in and came right out the side door. It was really hot in the garage, but we got dressed there, put the suits on.
So when you say you got dressed, you already had on clothes, right?
Yeah, we had regular clothes on. We put on the one piece.
Jumpsuits?
Yeah, coveralls, I guess is what they would be called. But yeah, we put those on.
Were these? Let me ask you a question. These coveralls, were these the coveralls that were in the black backpack you mentioned earlier?
Yes.
Can you describe to the jury how you put those on?
Well, they're one-piece suits, so you just step in the legs and then pull the shoulders and hands up, and then zip it up in the front.
And what else did you do once you put the jumpsuits on?
We put on the rubber latex gloves, and then used the duct tape to tape the arm cuffs, the wrists, and also the ankles.
What was the purpose of doing that?
To try to keep from leaving any evidence.
Whose idea was it to duct tape the arms and sleeves on the jumpsuits?
Jimmy's.
And so let's pause here for a minute. And you mentioned earlier that you'd use some kind of a crowbar or something in the garage to mess with try to make it look like that side door had been pried open. Did you and Mr. Rogers locate any other tools in the garage?
Yeah, when we first got there, when we were kind of looking around, Mark had a hand tool box, just a small box, but Jimmy had pulled a hammer out of it and kind of made a hammering motion and made a joke about it being destiny.
So Mr. Rogers picked up a hammer and made a joke about made a hammering motion?
Yes.
Like whose destiny?
Teresa's destiny. Jimmy, one of Jimmy's nicknames, Jimmy the Hammer, is what he's used that name. So
Jimmy the Hammer is Jimmy Rogers.
Yes.
Okay, let's move ahead. All right. So, were there any other hammers? Were there any other hammers in the garage?
Yes. As I started to go into the house, there's a small ice chest just to the right of that door. Had some stuff laying on it. There was another hammer laying on the top of that. It wasn't put there. It was there.
So Mr. Sievers didn't leave the hammers out for you and Mr. Rogers to use them?
No, not intentionally.
Okay. It was there. It wasn't. You saw an opportunity, so did you pick it up?
I did.
All right. So in this moment now, when you pick up that hammer on that chest, you're following Dr. Sievers into her home?
Yes.
You're behind her?
Yes.
Does she see you?
No.
Do you have any indication at all that she knows that you're behind her?
No. Not going into the house.
So did you actually follow her from the garage into the interior of her home?
I did.
And by this time, you've armed yourself with the hammer?
Yes. I still had planned on using my hands, but I had the hammer also as a backup.
And so you still had planned to try and somehow put her in a chokehold and knock her out?
Yeah, if I was behind her, it would be very easy to put somebody, especially a smaller person, in that hold. The problem happened because.
And so were you able to get close enough to her to put her in that chokehold that you wanted to put her into?
No.
Why not?
Because I accidentally kicked the dog dish over. Their dog dishes that they have are actually on a stand, so they're off the floor. But it's an obnoxious dish, and it's in the worst place possible not to kick it. So
What happened when you kicked it?
The dishes went flying everywhere. It made a huge noise. It startled her. She started to turn towards me before I had gotten close enough to actually be able to get, to do what I wanted to do.
So when you kicked the dog bowl, your presence in the house became known.
Yes.
And you said Dr. Sievers started to turn towards you.
Yeah.
Did she in fact turn towards you?
She started to turn towards me. I was afraid that if she turned around, she would scratch me or do something to leave evidence. I swung the hammer and I hit her.
When you hit her, did you expect? What was your expectation when you hit her with the hammer?
I expected it to knock her out.
It didn't knock her out, did it?
No.
It's a little more difficult than you thought it would be?
I've never hit anybody with a hammer before.
So, after you hit Dr. Sievers, after she turned around, did she ever realize that you were there?
Yeah, she hadn't turned all the way around when I hit her, so I hit her still from behind, but more on the side.
On the side of her head?
Yes.
Or the back side of her head?
The back upper side, yeah, this area. But I hit her. She didn't seem to react to it at all. And
did she say anything when you hit her?
Not when I hit her the first. So.
At any point, did you ever make contact with Dr. Did you and Dr. Sievers ever make eye contact?
Yes.
How did she look when you made eye contact with her?
Surprised.
All right. So did she just stand there and let you hit her with a hammer?
No.
What did she do?
Well, after I hit her, she finished turning towards me, she put her hands up to fight back, to defend herself.
Did she fight?
Yeah.
You fought for her life?
Yeah.
Where was Mr. Rogers while this was happening?
At that point, I still didn't know.
You couldn't see him?
I didn't see him.
How many times did you hit Dr. Sievers with that hammer?
3.
And when you hit Dr. Sievers with the hammer, did you intend for her to die?
No, I was trying to knock her out and to figure out a better way of doing it. I never in a million years envisioned beating her to death with a hammer.
Well, let's be clear. You were there, suited up, because you wanted her to die, right?
Yes, yes.
And so at some point, did Jimmy reveal his presence to you?
Yeah.
Did Mr. Rogers reveal his presence to you?
Yes.
How did he do that?
He appeared to my right and started hitting her also.
And when Mr. Rogers appeared, was Dr. Sievers still awake?
She was still standing up.
Was she still alive?
Yes. She had her hands up when I swung the other 2 times, so I'm not really sure how that connected, but she was looking at me through her arms, and she said, "Why?"
She said, "Why?"
Yeah.
To you?
Yes.
And then you said Mr. Rogers came from somewhere and he started hitting her. What did he do?
Just started hitting her over and over.
How would you describe how he was hitting her?
In a frenzy.
A frenzy? And you, so now you've hit your best friend's wife with a hammer several times, and now your other friend is hitting your best friend's wife with a hammer.
Yes.
And this was because the 2 of you wanted her dead?
Yes. We came there to kill her.
When Mr. Rogers started hitting Dr. Sievers in a frenzy, as you described, was she still standing?
Yes.
Was she still fighting for her life?
She still had her hands up, yes.
And so when he starts hitting her now, she's engaged with both of you.
She's still facing me. He was to the side. So.
Were you able to see where he was hitting her with the hammer?
In the head.
And what happened to what did she do after Mr. Rogers started hitting her in the head with the hammer?
I think she turned more into the kitchen and bent over. It seems like she had a hand on the countertop.
So let me ask you a question about that. You said she bent over. So when you say bent over, was she bent over at the waist?
Yes, she was still on her feet, bent over at the waist. Yes.
And was holding herself up on the counter?
I believe that she had a hand on the counter. I'm not absolutely positive of that. It could have been on her knee, but she was holding herself at that angle. So.
What happened at this point?
Just kept hitting her.
Kept hitting her?
Yeah.
Who?
Jimmy did.
Oh, you weren't hitting her anymore?
I was still at the point where I was still standing where I was standing when it started.
So if Dr. Sievers turned towards the counter, if you were facing her, and she turned towards the counter, and Mr. Rogers, how's Mr. Rogers able to keep hitting her in the back of the head?
He had to go past me.
He got in between you somehow?
Yeah. The way that their kitchen, I don't know if you guys have seen a diagram of the kitchen or not, but when you go into that entryway, it opens up into the kitchen, and there's like a long counter that's a standalone counter, and then I think the sinks and stuff are in that. When I caught up to her, she was just about to the counter, and she turned so that when I hit her, she was backed up to the counter, so she was between me and the counter. That area between the counter and the rest of, like, the stove and things, cabinets isn't real wide, so.
And so, you told us now she's in between. You said that she's at the counter. Mr. Rogers has somehow gotten in between you and Dr. Sievers, and he's still hitting her?
Yes.
And did she stay standing the whole time?
No. She may have stumbled or something, but she basically continued to fall all the way to the floor.
And what happened after she fell on the floor?
He continued to hit her.
He continued to hit her?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
But you didn't hit Dr. Sievers anymore?
No.
Again, let's make sure that we're all clear. At this point, you still wanted Dr. Sievers dead, right?
Yes.
And did Mr. Rogers also want her dead?
Yes.
So after she fell on the floor, what happened?
Well, she fell face down and was laying in the floor. And like I said, she continued to hit her.
Can you repeat what you just said, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'll ask you to speak up, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sorry about that. After she was down on the floor, he continued to hit her.
And at some point, did Mr. Rogers stop hitting Dr. Sievers with the hammer?
Yes, I'd ask him to stop.
Now, what did the use of the hammer on Dr. Sievers, what effect did that have on your plan to make this look like an accident?
Made it impossible.
Impossible?
Yes.
Okay, so at some point, did Mr. Rogers stop hitting her?
Yes.
Why did he stop?
I physically went over there and put my hand on him and said, stop. I physically walked over to the area where he was at and asked him to stop. I mean, put my hand on him.
All right. The jury has found Jimmy Rogers guilty of trespassing and second-degree murder. But why second-degree murder? He planned it. He drove here to Florida to carry out the crime. He bought coveralls and duct tape to wear during the crime. Went to Walmart to purchase more supplies for the murder. How is this not premeditated first-degree murder?
Because it seems like it would be, right?
You would think so.
Because he premeditated it. He bought supplies. He drove to Florida. So I'll explain.
Please.
When the trial was over and the jury got the case, the jury had options. The most pressing was first-degree murder, which could lead to the death penalty, or second-degree murder, which calls for 25 years to life in prison. Now, jurors said Rogers was guilty of second-degree murder, but when asked if he was the one holding the weapon, jurors said no, which means that they don't believe the prosecutor's star witness, Curtis Wright, who took the plea deal to testify against Rogers. Juror Harry Roberts spoke with Wink News and said for him, that decision was not that difficult. For him, the verdict came down to this. We just couldn't put the hammer in his hands, and there was no evidence he was really in the house, he said. Weighing the evidence and the testimonies, trying to get into the heads of Rogers' ex-girlfriend Taylor Shoemaker and Curtis Wayne Wright, Roberts said that he had a tough time deciding who was telling the truth. It was really difficult because there was a lot of emotion going on, he said. Roberts said he thinks Rogers knew what he was getting into, but doesn't think he planned it with Wright and Sievers' husband, Mark. Roberts said he thinks Rogers knew what he was getting into, but doesn't think he planned it with Curtis Wayne Wright and Mark Sievers. Mm-hmm. So we were looking for ways he was linked, and with all the evidence that was given, like I said, it was the coveralls and his actions that, trying to get rid of evidence, is basically what convicted him of it, he said. Jimmy Rogers was sentenced to life in prison with no parole by Judge Bruce Kyle. Judge Kyle called this one of the most horrific crimes he has ever tried.
Yeah. Well, this whole crime is just disgusting. But
so they always say, reasonable doubt gets thrown around there in court. And
if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit.
The prosecution just did not have the evidence showing that Jimmy Rogers was part of the planning, or that there was even no evidence that Jimmy Rogers was actually in the house. All they were going on was the testimony of Curtis Wainwright and the testimony of his ex-girlfriend at this point, that he said he did it, which is basically hearsay.
Didn't they have video?
They had video of him at Walmart buying things, but again,
they can't put him at the scene of the crime.
Right,
okay.
Exactly. So I can kind of see why the jury couldn't convict beyond a reasonable doubt that Jimmy Rogers was guilty of first-degree murder.
Maybe it's his middle name, the Hammer.
The Hammer, yeah. So, anyway.
I wonder if he's going to call himself that in prison.
I don't know. It'd be interesting. So, that concludes part 3.
Okay.
Part 4 will be available tomorrow. If you don't want to wait, like we said, head on over to Patreon and subscribe, and you can hear that right away.
Whether you want to wait or not, just do that anyway. There's a lot of cool stuff there. Check out our Etsy store for some awesome Paradise After Dark gear.
And please make sure to follow us on social media at Paradise After Dark Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and at Paradise Dark 239 on Twitter.
Tweet.
You can also email us at paradiseafterdarkpodcast@gmail.com.
You can also check out our website, paradiseafterdark.com, for our latest episodes. Again, the links to the social media Lauren just spoke about, our Etsy store, and of course, Patreon.
Please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on, and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
Yes, it does. And thanks for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark. Ooh.